Buying a small business sounds like the perfect shortcut to success until you actually do it. And then you find out it's not as easy as everyone makes it seem. Well, this has been the theme of this series of the Unpolished MBA. And welcome back. We've been having the Acquisition Chronicles as our theme. And as you know, I've been joined by guest co hosts Kinza Osmond as well as Jed Morris. Both of them are acquisition entrepreneurs who bought businesses separately in different states, different cities. They didn't know each other. And each of their businesses went south and caused them to file bankruptcy. If you've been following along, we've dedicated one episode to Jed's story, and that was episode 141. And now this episode is dedicated to Kinza. And as mentioned previously, there is only but so much they can share about their particular deal and the circumstances around what happened, but they do share enough for you to learn what to look for and about some of the biggest myths about buying a small business. During this episode, Kinza went through some instances that add more color to things like why clean financials don't necessarily mean it's a good deal. And that's because the Q of E, or the quality of earnings, really doesn't tell the whole story. Kinza and I also talk about how to avoid being tricked by brokers and sellers. And I know that sounds insane, but this is business. As Jed said in our first episode in this series, it's gladiator and you are in an arena. So Kinza and I both shared similar stories of being deceived, completely different deals, industry scenarios. Again, before this series, we did not know each other. I didn't know Jed. I didn't know Kinza. So we're hoping that you can learn from others' mistakes. You can learn from our mistakes. You can learn from things that went right, things that went wrong, and build on that. Because most of the time we're seeing you only get half of the truth when you see a lot of this information online, and all of it only shows what can go right. But no one is talking about what goes wrong and what quite often happens throughout that process. So let's hop into the episode. So today is just you and I, Kinza. Jed is not joining us, but one of the things that we haven't really gotten into is more about what you do and more about even your story, how we even got here. And part of this conversation also needs to revolve around a lot of the misconceptions and straight out lies, honestly, that people are told about acquiring a small business. So today is all about you, Kinza. Welcome.
Thanks for the platform. I'm eager to chat and continue to share our experiences with the audience because I think any little bit of it helps when you decide to go buy or sell a small business.
Yes. And that's the great thing about your experiences because you have it on both the seller side because you've been a business broker. Are you still involved in business brokering at all?
Yeah, actually, I am a market president for Optima Mergers and Acquisitions. So we work with clients 1 million plus EBITDA across the US, but specifically for me, Central Texas.
Okay, great. So you have the seller perspective and you have the buyer's perspective because you have acquired business, you've turned around business before. As we talked about this series, you and Jed both had acquired businesses that didn't quite turn out the way you wanted to. And some that turned out, it was harder, but you turned it around. It was like, yeah, you can have it. I'm out of here. So in that case, there are some beliefs that folks come with when they come into this. I just want to know, were you involved in any type of course or accelerator or anything of that nature that got you interested in acquiring a small business or even being involved in business brokerage?
Um, the story goes that a long time ago, I got my MBA from UT Austin and found my husband in the program. And so that was great ROI, fantastic. And we were at home and one of our MBA classmates gave my husband a book Buy Then Build, which you actually see on the bookshelf behind me right there.
Mhm.
Walker was kind enough to autograph that copy for me. And so my husband got a copy of the book and he's like, man, this isn't for me. Pretty happy with what I'm doing in my life. Right. But maybe you're interested in this. And so just by nature of someone dropping that book off at our house, I read the book and I was like, man, this is what I'm going to do. I want autonomy and flexibility in my life. Maybe we're going to have a family one day. I'm a consultant and traveling every week. And so that's really how I learned about the concept of buying businesses and how I eventually stumbled my way into a business brokerage as well.
So I don't think I've ever read a book that's been that impactful on me where I literally is like, yeah, I'm doing this and spending all my time and money. So so that's a big step. That's a big gap. What happened in between as far as resources you had or people you may have followed, relied upon in order to close a lot of that gap before you not only searched, but signed on the dotted line, personal guarantee, loans, everything?
Yeah, good question. I think I was in a really impressionable place because I just really knew that I wanted to do something different with my life, right? When you're flying in and out every week and you're living out of hotel rooms and suitcases and you don't really have that much of a personal life, you're really ready to seek something more, but you want something that is a risk mitigated way to exit your current opportunity, not, a full leap into startups. And so the concept of avoiding the stats of startup failure and acquiring a small business that has existing cash flow, they were really compelling. But the journey to actually acquiring took much longer. I'd say probably the better part of 2 years, I would think. I started searching, as probably most people do, on the side of their full time job and just tried my hand at a few different things, learned a lot of really tough lessons, like what type of opportunities to look at. When do you bring in a lender? What does putting in an LOI look like? And when I had kind of greased the wheels enough, a business broker asked me to join his team. And so I told him, like, hey, I'm going to acquire something. Are you sure you want me to join your team right now? That doesn't make any sense. Right. And he must have known how hard it was to acquire a business and that I thought that I would never do it. And of course I did. Right. So I learned a lot, saw under the hood of business brokerage, all sorts of industries, all sorts of business sizes. You see how many businesses are actually sellable versus not. And it's kind of just disheartening and sad to see how many business owners are relying on this one massive liquidity event to sell their baby that they've grown for decades. And it might not be worth what they're really aiming for. So it was a sad expose, but a really intense learning into what it really takes to grow and run a business. And so at that point, I launched a full time search and ran into the company that I was really looking for a few months into that search.
Oh, a few months in? Wow. I didn't know it was that quickly. Okay. So, wow. All right. So, seeing that you've been working with sellers and seeing some kind of disappointing outcomes for them, did it best help you in knowing how to position yourself as a buyer and also with that, when I say positioning yourself as a buyer, how did you know what to avoid? Did it help you figure out what to avoid? Like when it's smoke and mirrors on, let's say, one of these listing sites, is there any way to tell? Could you?
That's a good question. I think that, working as a business broker exposes you to all of the things that owners are not really willing to say.
Mm,
They provide a lot of information and, their numbers are one thing. When you finally get the numbers, you realize that the numbers are very different from what they claimed. So there's a sense of like humility in the process too. Like there's a humanness that you learn from being an advisor in this space because this is people livelihoods and there's a dance and a nuance to it and relationship building, a trust building aspect to it. So as a buyer who had been a broker, you realize so much that it's all trust and relationships. And so I'm not lasering in as a buyer. I'm like, here are the 15 questions you need to answer. And this is a
okay.
human to human conversation of like, hey, I'm Kinza. This is what I've done. This is what I really like about your company. Can you tell me a little bit about it? And then building iteratively from there. And I think in my own transaction, I probably did that so much that it actually kind of took away from a lot of the deep dives that really needed to happen.
I see. Okay. And that's very easy to build relationships when, especially it's a nice seller, and they're nice and it seemed like they wanted to do right by the business. Trust me, I've been caught up in those conversations as well. But, in my case, I've had to walk away and regardless of the relationship, but it made it harder. It definitely made it harder. So when you said that the numbers are different than, let's say, what's represented in the sim, for example, is it something that a Q of E could pick up? A quality of earnings report?
Yeah, I think to an extent. I mean, I'm a big believer in QVs, like get the full blown thing, right? For a company that's of a certain size, that's complex, like definitely get a QV. I wouldn't even advocate for a QOV light, but also like garbage in, garbage out, right? So if you've got garbage data going in, if you've got accounts receivable that isn't connected to QuickBooks or kept on the balance sheet, like that's a different level of diligence. And you as an acquirer would have to make your QV firm aware of that. And when the firm gives you their report and advisory, and then they kind of wipe their hands clean, you're still the quarterback, right? You've got to know what the QB is saying. You've got to know what to do about it. You've got to know how it impacts your valuation. You've got to know how to negotiate and get clarity. So there's a whole dance around the QB that takes a lot of skill as well. And you're largely alone in that unless you're working with someone who is an advisor or an investor who's deeply rooting for you in your success.
And that's honestly for most self-funded searchers, that's actually rare. A lot of folks are out here doing it alone or with just a couple of people that are searching as well, maybe in different markets. But it's like kind of like the blind leading the blind and an overconfidence, particularly if they come from private equity, because they understand the financial statements and what that looks like. You mentioned really understanding the Q of E. In our last episode, that was released last week, we had Yvette Owo on, and we went through some of the parts of a QV I had done for a business, and we went through the sections and all of that. And ultimately, the QV, she thought it was 'cause her company does that too. So the QV, she thought it was pretty solid as far as what it provided. However, what I found wrong with the business was no way picked up by the Q of E. And I can't blame the Q of E person because they don't, they don't really know the industry. This is the problem with making decisions just based upon numbers, right? Like you have to have some in depth understanding and insights about an industry. So the business that you ultimately chose, was it one that you had insight into the industry or connections in the industry to help you with?
It's a fantastic question. And I think really revisiting the point on who to blame, right? There's nobody to blame but yourself when you're searching, right? And that's the heaviest burden to carry because sometimes you don't even know what decisions you're actually making as part of the process because you don't know what the process is. Or to your point, you're not fluent in the industry that you're acquiring in. And so I believe that it's of great benefit to have industry experience because not only do you have experience and can build trust with the team, the seller, have credibility, know what to do when you look at an opportunity in a particular industry, but you also know where to dig when you are performing due diligence, right? So if I've got industry experience, I know the hot button topics in that industry. And so, like for me, if I'm looking at an apartment locating firm, which is what I acquired, then I would be looking at lead generation. What is the source of the leads? Is it the agents? Is it the company generating them? Those are two completely different customer acquisition costs, right? Another area I'd be looking at is, is it a retail site office based model or is it a remote workforce? What does the culture look like? How do they actually interact with each other? Is it one team or is it disaggregated, fragmented teams? Because that changes how we manage a company. So there are hot button issues or topics for any company in any industry. I'd say there's probably 3 to 5 in every single one. And knowing those tells you what to really diligence to the depth that you need to find the things that make an impact.
Mm. When you mentioned having some insight into what the culture looks like, how the employees engage with each other, how can you find that out? A lot of the sellers are really, private when it comes to that because they don't want people to know. I've had one customer walk me around and, introduce me to everyone and do all that. And the whole cover was she's a potential new big customer. And so that's how I was able to kind of be introduced, but you still don't get the reality of what it's like day to day. Everyone's on their best behavior if there's a potential customer in the house. So how do you get that and be able to find out that maybe the place is toxic? Is there a way?
And this is such a huge challenge. I mean, even for private equity firms, I can't tell you the number of acquisitions that likely fail because the culture wasn't what it needed to be, right? And that's not anybody's fault because I think that's really hard to uncover. Some of the ways I think about uncovering culture is both one with seller introductions and without seller introductions, right? So let's say that you decide to, with the owner's permission, secret shop the company. And so, a company I visited in the past, like a wheel repair company, right? I went in as a customer at a retail site. I had a chipped wheel that I needed repaired. I actually experienced what it felt like in the business to actually be a customer, get serviced, understand their response times, see who was actually leading. Is it the owner? Is it the owner? And that's not what's claimed on the sim, right? Like if the owner's the first person saying hi to me, right? But that's not what the sim says, then you know that there's other misrepresentations in the materials being offered. And that kind of gets your spidey senses going. I'll pause there and see if you've got any comments.
You get the spidey senses going, but you still see all the other good in the deal. It's kind of like this train. How do you stop it from running off the wheels? So for me, I would just say in the deal where I spent a lot of money and time, it really took it off the wheels from me. There were small signs. You've mentioned that in other episodes that we recorded. There were small signs, but what really got me was I found something that I knew what it took to correct it, and it would cost millions of dollars, literally millions post-close, and I knew the business couldn't withstand that. And everyone tried to convince me things would be fine. Everyone, the broker, the bank, right? Advisors, besides some of my advisors that were actual current small business owners from acquiring small businesses. So, and they were actively operating them. And they're like, no, if you don't feel good about it, it's not. I'm like, it's not that I don't feel good about it. I don't go based upon emotions. The thing is, I have years of experience in construction. So I know what this takes to fix. And a business person who have never built anything, never been on a job site, never done heavy construction would have no idea what's involved in replacing this equipment. Like you literally have to remove the roof, have it taken out with a crane, have the footings redone, have the electrical you know what I mean? Like most people don't know that. So that's really for me where it was like, if you can't even admit that is what's required to do this, and eventually they did, like, yeah, it'll take that. You'll just have to shut down. For how long? Oh, about 5 months. You gotta shut the business down for 5 months and no one bothered to say that this needs to be replaced. You see what I mean? So it's like that was it for me. But I'm sure there's other things going on behind the scenes that I didn't see.
Yeah, and that's really the thing, right? Like when you learn something material like that, it's not necessarily just about that. Like it absolutely should be because that's a huge impact, but it's like what else is there? What are the other skeletons in the closet that we just decided to not really talk about? Because what that is like you close and the next day you discover boom and you're like, oh crap, this cash flow is not what it is. And there's no way I'm gonna be able to service debt. That's an awful, a punch you in the gut sort of feeling. And I'll share an example, right? A manufacturing company that I was looking at, fantastic company, great margins. They couldn't expand the facility and they had no ability to expand capacity. They were maxed out, right? And so the first thing a buyer is going to look at is like the financials, how great the company is. If you don't know the space, you won't think to expand the facility and look at the land all around that you can't expand into. So you've literally got to relocate that entire facility. Okay, where are you going to relocate to? How long is it going to take? How much is it going to cost? How much staff are you going to lose? The time to build, the cost to build. Are we going to have to shut down? Hopefully not, right? And so these are non-starters for anyone who has experience in the space. And the best way to dig those things out is to look at opportunities where you have experience in the industry. And if you don't, I'm not saying don't acquire in that space. I'm saying surround yourself with people who are experts in the space whom you trust.
Mhm. Oh, gosh, because one of the things that you hear a lot is you don't need to be in that industry to buy a business in it. Yeah, and like you said, perhaps, but it sure helps. And, if not, surround yourself with people who are. But then I'm wondering, because what we've mentioned on other episodes, I remember I think it was like the first episode with you, Jed, and I, and Jed was like, "Hey, your competitors want you to fail." I mean, even if they like you, but ultimately you're competing. This is gladiator. So it's not like you can have someone that close to you that they're like in the industry and is willing to share the ins and out. How do people go about trying to even consider things outside of their immediate expertise with confidence?
I think that there are some functional areas that are broadly good to have experience in. Like if you're in finance, right? You can lift and shift that experience from one company to another, and it's critical in any business, right? On the flip side, if your experience is in software development and the opportunities you're looking at don't have that as a requirement, you've got a question to answer, right? Like you can either put your experience aside and go into it alone and find advisors by way of networking, talking in your circles to people and reaching out to existing business owners and going through that whole exercise, or you can simply acquire a company where your experience is relevant. And I find that pathway a lot more compelling because you actually know what you're doing, you know what you're looking for, and the team is going to trust you more when you actually take the ownership seat. So it's also like a search fund versus self-funded search question, right? If you've got a search fund, usually they have some sort of industry-based thesis. So you can learn, you can see multiple opportunities in the same industry. You've got investors lined up who have experience in that industry. And I really like that approach. But also, self-funded search is the wild west of
Yeah.
search, right? And there's so many opportunities that are just all over the place. And the three dimensions that usually define what happens in that search are geography, industry, and company size, right? So if you're very specific about one, you have to flex on the other two. So you're not necessarily able to limit yourself to one industry because you're not going to have deal flow. And so navigating that seesaw is something that you encounter, which is why so many people end up finding a business that has nothing to do with their background and making it seem like if you spin it enough that it's going to make sense, but you can't spin to yourself when you're in the dark times of owning a business.
Wow. Yeah, so much. It's so much. And I keep saying that just the lack of having the massive amount of information that the seller has is it's just a tough one, particularly when you're taking on so much debt in order in equity. I still consider equity debt expensive debt. That's what I consider it.
Yeah, especially with the step up, that's really a step down, right?
That is right. That's
Yeah.
right.
Yeah. I think touching on your point, Monique, I think sellers were motivated to present a business in the most positive light possible. Why wouldn't they present it in the most positive light? And inadvertently and unintentionally, this results in withholding super important information. And the responsibility lies with the buyer to uncover these risks rather than exclusively relying on the seller. Trust but verify. But as a business advisor, as an M&A advisor, I have to advise my clients that we need to get ahead of this, right? It's like a PR stunt gone wrong. Like if you do something, you got to get ahead of it rather than just wait for someone to stumble across it. So be honest with your advisor about what it is in the business that you're having trouble being honest and transparent to a buyer about, because that's only going to end up being problematic down the road. So let's get it out. Let's talk about it and address it, which tells you like, that's why it's so important to plan an exit out of a business multiple months, a year plus ahead of time, so you can actually address some of these challenges in the business. Business doesn't change overnight, right?
Yeah, that's true. you have a great LinkedIn presence. You share a lot of great tips. So anyone that's a buyer or a seller, because remember, Kinza has expertise on both sides. You guys should follow her on LinkedIn, and her link will be provided in the show notes as well. But one of the posts that I saw from you not too long ago was basically evaluating a target business, and you gave like three things in a checklist for buyers to really try to find out. And number one was, what's the real reason for selling? I mean, there's so many. I mean, it's always the common thing. Oh, I'm just retiring. Oh, I want to do another, I'm interested in another business, or, to concentrate on another business that I have. Like, how do you get to that? How?
Yeah, I mean, I think first and foremost, being able to assess someone's character in a genuine human to human way, and then being able to calibrate that assessment of character from outside sources, right? So things as simple as like you're looking at the company's Google reviews and you're reading the good stuff and you're reading the bad stuff and you're trying to understand like what is the business owner's role in all of this? Does this even, affect or impact the business owner? Is this like a character based assessment that you need to make? Is it not, right? Another way to calibrate it is like Glassdoor, right? Like, what is the team saying about the business? Do they like it? Do they not like it? I know when I went through the turnaround of my business, I'm sure people hated me, right? Like, and so for the folks who stuck around, thanks for sticking around for the ride in a turnaround. That's really tough. Thank you, right? And for the folks who didn't stick around, thank you for exiting because that was not the right ride for you, right? It's not
Yeah.
pretty out there, right? And so getting to really know somebody on a human level is so important, but also don't trust yourself through the process, right? Really look at if you have rose colored glasses on and build a support system around you that's going to hold you accountable, right? So
Yeah.
if I said to my friend or buddy, like, hey, if I see such and such and I'm pretending like everything's fine and I'm just full steam ahead in this deal, like, please shake me, stop me.
Yeah. A lot of people don't like that though. So what I found is that some people will say that, but people still won't call things out because they don't want to offend the person. That's number one. Number two is, for example, someone like you, and I've even experienced this myself. I will tell people that I have an advisory board around me, right? But these people respect me. I respect them. They respect my expertise. They're like, oh, but if you've done the vetting, like, you just know your stuff. Like, listen, you're putting too much trust in me. That's why I asked you to surround me. So sometimes they don't give the feedback because they figure still you have it figured out. And it's just not true.
Ugh. Yeah, the silliest thing that I've done to hold myself accountable, and now at the beginning of a process, I tell some trusted advisors, like, hey, if such and such happens, like, please just say that this is not good anymore. So they feel comfortable actually being able to say that because I asked them to, right? So as a searcher or even a business owner looking to exit, right? If you have some criteria for who's a good fit and no one fits those criteria, you're going to do one of two things. You're either going to reassess or you're going to hold yourself accountable to the criteria and wait till you find the right person, which can be really hard to do, right? So
Mhm.
you're asking the right people to hold you accountable. The second super silly thing that I did was literally just made an Excel file of the conditions under which that I would transact. And if I didn't meet a certain weighted average, I would not be able to move forward, right? And so all of the key criteria in a business, like I need X percentage recurring revenue, or I need a certain percentage margin, or I need a team who is who are rock stars and ready to, take in more leads if I decide to invest in marketing, things like that. It's going to be different for every person, but at the end of the Google sheet, it spits out a score for me and I got to follow it. Like that's it.
Okay, that's good. The scorecard is a good one. The scorecard is a good one. And as uncover things, that score can change. That's what happened with mine. So you offer a lot of good tools and checklists and things, even through your LinkedIn profile. Can people access those types of things from your website? Do you have an email list? Things like that?
Yeah, for sure. So the simplest way to access these tools is to sign up to the Chief Rebel newsletter. It's called the Rebels Manifesto. It comes out every week. You can go on thechiefrebel.com and sign up or on my LinkedIn. The other way to access this, which is really exciting, I'm working on a book and you can actually pre-order the book right now. through pre-ordering the book, you get access to all 300 plus slides across 25 plus modules on should you buy or invest in a business? How do you buy a business? How do you grow it? What are all the watch outs and spiritual entrepreneurship moments that might happen for you? So it comes free with the book. And I think it's a really great resource. The same one that I actually use to teach MBA students about ETA as well.
Oh, that's fantastic in a business school. It's nothing like hearing from someone who has actually done it because you get a lot of, I don't know, tricksters online who say, yeah, I own 7 businesses that make me, $1 million a month. And there's no way of verifying any of this, but it sounds good. The hot takes and all that is pretty cool. All right. With that in mind, what are some of the biggest like lies, myths, mistruths, misrepresentations that buyers, let's start on the buyer side, that buyers are reading online, learning about and believing, right? Because they don't know any different. It's not their fault. Um, as they enter into this space of small business acquisition.
That's a good question. And I think a lot of the buy side myths align with a lot of the sell side myths too, because if you think about it, the conditions under which you acquire a company, it's the same way to assess a company prior to going to market, right?
Yeah.
One of the things that I think is like top of the list for me, acquiring a business is a quick path to wealth. Like it is not a quick path. There are no quick paths. Yeah, there's maybe a lower failure rate than startups, but I view them as completely different paths designed for completely different people with completely different objectives. So I think that acquiring a business can certainly generate life changing wealth. I think the term quick is relative. Most deals require capital to be tied up for years, right? And initially, buyers are paying themselves not a lot, right? I think the journey is long, right? The loan term is 10 years, but there's no shortcuts, right? This is your life. So it's a lot more challenging and riskier than it's portrayed to be.
Yeah. And one of the things that's so common nowadays, particularly with first time acquirers, is the whole concept of like no money down. You can do all seller financing. And basically, I'm sure it happens in some cases. But have you ever seen that? Have you ever known anyone where that's been the case for them?
You can get a business with 100% seller financing under certain situations, right? One of those situations is if you've got an existing relationship or a lot of industry experience where by you enter a company and you have some sweat equity and then they give you the rest under seller financing because now they really trust you. I think that you can find it. I think it's rare. I think for a first time buyer who doesn't have that level of expertise, it's almost like a no go, but I'm not going to say never. The second condition under which 100% seller financing could happen is if you're buying a business that's going to require a lot of work, right? There's a reason the business owner is exiting that opportunity and providing you this incredible privilege of 100% financing with no bank involvement. It's because that business is probably not going to qualify for financing through a traditional bank or through a traditional SBA loan. And they don't want to go through the headache of you discovering that. And so that's why they're offering that financing. But I think it's possible, but really as a first time acquirer, do you want to bet on odds that might like, if you're betting on the odds, the chance of that happening is like 2% of the entire pie.
Yeah.
Is that
Yeah.
where you want to put your bet?
Right, right. Oh, some folks probably will if they have no other options or they feel as if they have no other options. They're willing to chase after that 2%.
I think that's the key there, Monique. If they don't think they have other options, but you do, right? What are the other options? Go work in a small business, get experience, go consult for a small business, get experience, build a relationship, go partner up with someone who's got the ability to get that financing and go in as a partner duo. Sweat equity exists. That's one of those first two options, possibly as well. If you don't need the income, maybe you're earning equity into a business. Those are all ways to de risk and still get into small business and go in eyes wide open.
So, what are your thoughts on the idea that buyers should send in as many LOIs as possible and use LOIs to get in the door? with talking to sellers?
I mean, LOIs are non-binding, but also like, do you want to put that many tentacles out there just trying to get some conversations?
What I
Like,
thought, but I keep hearing, or like me, if I'm seeing it, and I know other folks are seeing it, I have a different philosophy. That's not the way I went about it, but that's what many first time acquisition entrepreneurs are being told. Get the reps in, get the reps in. If you see a business you're interested in, just based upon the first pass of the sim and all that, do an LOI and just know that you can change it.
yeah, I think that the challenge, well, let's first take a step back on like, what is the condition that requires putting in an LOI without really knowing much? And it might be that there's a business broker who is collecting LOIs by a certain date because it's an extremely competitive opportunity. You can't talk to the business owner unless you have an LOI in hand. And so, in that type of situation, I can understand that you might want to craft an LOI or an IOI just to have a foot through the door. But if it's a business that's, available on the market, a regular amount of activity, I would want to talk to the business owner and I'd really want to understand, is this a fit for me? What are they looking for? And ultimately, what I tell other entrepreneurs or my clients is that once you submit an LOI, you want the structure to stay the same before and after the LOI. If the structure starts changing, that's when the deal starts going south and you want to minimize deal fatigue. You want to keep the momentum going. Before and after the LOI, if the structure stays the same, but the buckets, the amount that you've allocated to cash at close, the amount that you've allocated to a seller note, the amount that you've allocated to escrow or other aspects of the deal, that can change, 15 to 20% less because you're going to find some things that you're going to want to negotiate in the transaction. But hopefully there's no big structural changes unless it's coming from the bank. But guess what? You should have talked to the bank before or very close to putting in the LOI because they're going to be putting up the money. They're probably going to want to have some requirements on what the structure looks like, whether there's retention bonuses and things of that sort.
See, that's the step that a lot of these folks that are talking about this online never mentions. The fact that you should bring the bank in before you do the LOI. But the way that they're discussing the the quickness really of submitting LOIs, you don't even have time to bring the bank in. If you find something today, they say within the next day or within the 48 hours, you should have an LOI. And the bank, your urgency is not theirs. And particularly if you're doing this every week, like it to me, I don't understand how that makes sense for both parties. So I was just wondering who is actually doing that because I just wouldn't advise it. I haven't seen sellers be like, "Oh, okay. Yeah, we'll change the amount that's required in escrow. We can change the amount that you want in seller's note." Like, I haven't seen that be the case in my own deals. Now I know everyone is different, but when that seller gets the LOI, they're almost counting on exactly what's in there. And if there's any changes, they want it to be really small, not these major changes.
Yeah, absolutely. If you're getting an SBA loan, it is not an easy way to get money, right? Like there's a underwriting process. Lenders have their credit criteria and they're going to look at the opportunity. They're going to look at your background. They're going to try to see if it fits or not. They're going to look at your personal financial statement. They're going to see the defensibility of the personal guarantee, right? If anything happens and things go south, right? So there's a lot of moving pieces. I'd say generally LOIs can take anywhere from 2 to 4 weeks, right? Because your lender is actually along the ride and they're going to try to present a structure that makes sense. I think that there are a lot of searchers who want to present an LOI quickly. And I myself got a deal under LOI in 7 days. So I think when you've gotten warmed up enough and your relationship with the lender is, really smooth, then you're lockstep. Once you get to the lockstep and you find a deal, boom, you're under contract. But until you get in lockstep with a lender, I find it difficult to just throw LOIs over the fence and see what sticks. That's just not
Mhm.
compelling for me or should be compelling for a business owner, right? This is a major life decision.
Yeah, for sure. Some folks think, hey, if I just, particularly if they're taking the number from the sim, if it has a price on it, because, there's a lot of businesses out there that don't put a price on it. But I guess folks figure, hey, if I just offer them what they ask for, put that in the LOI, but then go and start doing my due diligence, and find things, and, we can kind of renegotiate at that point. But I haven't seen that to be the case. Not that I've
Yeah.
tried
And
it. I haven't tried that, but I know I take a good look at the personality of the sellers that I talk to, and they're ready to go. They don't have time for these games. Either we're moving forward or we're not.
And M&A advisors have that same perspective, right? If you're working with a client and you see somebody present a 5x valuation, right? And you expect that business to be closer around the 3 to 4, your spidey senses are going off that this is overvalued, right? So I'm not sharing with the client that like, oh my God, this is great. Like go do this deal. I'm looking at the potential buyer's background. If it's a private equity firm or if it's anyone who's like overvalued the company, I'm just suspicious that they're trying to get it under contract and find things during diligence. And then they're just going to nickel and dime. And then suddenly it gets to the same place or even lower than where other people actually began the conversation on negotiation. So
Mm.
there's a dance to it. There's certainly companies that are valued more than 5x multiple of earnings, and they absolutely should be valued higher if they're the right size in the right industry. But just as an example, no one's buying it, right? On either side of the fence.
Yeah.
The only people buying it are misinformed business owners who have gotten tricked by M&A advisors who are telling them that their company is going to sell for X bazillion millions of dollars or X amount of revenue purely because the business owner said, I want $5 million. Is their business worth 5 million? That's a different story.
Mhm. So, as a business broker or whatever they're calling themselves, right? They could be investment banker. I've seen people call themselves investment banker. In reality, they're a business broker, and I know there's, some nuances between there, but they won't tell them the truth because they want the listing. So
Yep.
they just
Yep.
make
And
it
then they're going
hard.
to take it to market. They're going to take it to market and let the market dictate the price, saying that, oh, it's the market that defines the value of your business. And unfortunately, that just leaves a business on market for a long time. And then buyers think that there's things wrong with the business or that it's picked over because it's been on market for a long time and nothing's happened. So, got to work with the right person.
What's considered a long time for being on the market?
I think it depends on the type of opportunity it is. Like if you've got a healthy business where it's not largely dependent on the seller, I'd say those businesses are under contract probably within the first 8 weeks, right? If they're not, then there's something materially challenging, right? Let's say like a ton of customer concentration or, CapEx investment that needs to be made and it just kind of sits around for a while. But the vast majority of good businesses are transacted and closed probably within 9 months.
Well, that's good to know. I've found that in some of the more troubling businesses, they don't actually tell you how long they've been on the market. They're not on the platform, they're not listed on any of these public platforms. So only having the broker tell you, the history and that they're looking for, the good parts of the business, of course. But is there a responsibility for them to be honest about how long the business has been on the market? And also, if it's been under contract before, how many times, all of that.
I think that there is a severe lack of trust and integrity in the space, unfortunately, and that needs to be corrected. The industry needs to be professionalized, and that whatever questions are asked should be answered accurately because it is a lot of this misinformation and not sharing information that leads to issues after the dotted line is signed. And that puts what at stake? That puts a broker's character and integrity at stake. Getting caught up in something like that, that puts a business owner, their team, their values at stake, and ultimately positions a buyer to not succeed, right? Because they don't have an understanding of the actual business. They have an understanding of the business they thought they were buying.
Yep. And for those of you guys who think I'm so smart, I have been tricked like that. Yep. I have been tricked like that. That
He'll check me too.
you raised your hand, you too. Yeah. So
Amen.
that's just the reality. If you're not prepared for many of the things that we've been talking about, you need to just get educated. You need to follow the right people. Don't just get caught up in the hype. And that's why I really appreciate Kinza for joining the series we've been doing and also for what you post online. So it's spot on. So Kinza, we're going to wrap up this episode by asking, what's the one piece of business advice you would give to a buyer of a small business, and then one piece of advice you would give to a seller?
I'm sure there's a ton of different advice that's out there. One thing that comes to mind for buyers is that having clean financials and tax returns doesn't necessarily mean it's a solid opportunity, right? There's a lot more. The tip of the iceberg is what you're seeing. Solid tax returns are a great foundation, but there is all sorts of stuff that you should be looking at. Things like, what industry is it in? Are there headwinds or tailwinds? How much of the revenue is recurring and contract based that is transferable to you? Is the team aligned with you as a leader? How capable are they? Are you interested in leading a workforce that has room to grow, or are top performers, right? So there's a lot more to a business than only clean financials. That's a first step. You've got to look at it holistically.
That's good. And now for sellers, what would be a top piece of advice you'd give to them?
For business owners, I think the number one piece of advice I would give to them is start working on your business, not in your business, far earlier than you think you have to before exit, right?
Mhm.
We all talk about how you want to sell your business on an upswing, but how do you sell a good business, and how do you get to the upswing in a way in which is planned and not a health issue, not a personal issue with a relationship, right? That's the type of stuff that you want to have planned for well in advance. So I'm talking like work with somebody, work with yourself, look at the business holistically and find the gaps, which is, remove yourself from the business over time, get the customer concentration worked out of the business, secure your key team members in long-term employment agreements or some sort of ESOP related option. There are tons of levers you can pull in your business that will make it very attractive to a buyer that will then warrant a higher valuation and you ultimately achieving whatever your exit goals are of that business.
Wow, the whole ESOP part that would be so incredible if I ran across a business that had that in place, right? So I hope you talk more about that on one of your LinkedIn posts or in your newsletter. So that's such a great idea.
Point taken. People are the heart of it all. And the more we can do to keep people engaged, kudos to anyone who wants to do that, because it's going to make transactions a whole lot easier on both sides of the fence.
Wow. Incredible, Kinza. Thank you once again for sharing your expertise and knowledge with the unpolished audience. Thank you.
Thanks for the opportunity, Monique. I really enjoyed it.
Thanks for joining us on the Acquisition Chronicles. Today's episode hopefully gave you some key takeaways and reminders. We appreciate you listening, and if you found value in today's discussion, please share the podcast with someone who might benefit. We'll be back next Tuesday with more stories from the trenches, so make sure to subscribe and follow along. Until then, take care. Thank you for listening to the Unpolished MBA podcast. To hear more episodes or to request to become a guest, please visit unpolishedmba.com.